Hello everyone, and welcome back to the FORGEHUB YouTube channel. This is Paints, and today I'm bringing you guys the first episode in a new series of design talks covering infection design. Keep in mind these are only guidelines. These design talks are to kind of show forgers what people have had success with in the past, not to tell you what you can and cannot do with your infection map. So in this episode I'm going to be talking about movement. So why exactly is movement so important in infection? I guess the main reason movement is important to consider in infection is that it challenges the abilities of players to multitask between moving and shooting, while providing them with goals to achieve and risks to take along the way. This is especially important in Halo's iteration of infection, because Halo has always been about moving and shooting, and if you take away movement, especially in infection, you're not challenging the player on multiple levels. Infection is a game type that, if not designed for correctly, can lead to very stagnant gameplay. And this is why it's important to keep players moving, whether it's a survivor or infected player. That being said, let's talk a bit about holdouts. Now, I think holdouts are an important thing to touch on when covering movement in infection. I think this is where a lot of forgers have this misconception that a holdout should be this kind of final stand area for players to find a shotgun in and stay put. Infection in Halo is fundamentally different than a lot of zombie modes, in that the infected are player controlled instead of being controlled by AI. So, an AI is not going to get bored of running down the same hallway over and over again. But for a player-controlled zombie, it's just not very fun, no matter how balanced it actually is. So while these areas may play balanced overall, it's important to consider that infected gameplay will most likely be monotonous and boring if these kinds of holdouts are available. A properly designed map should challenge a player's skill set on multiple levels. Holdouts should be designed to keep survivors moving within the holdout, to cover multiple entrances or sightlines. Survivors should never feel completely safe in a holdout, and there should always be a way for a coordinated group of infected to overrun a holdout. Let's talk a bit about movement for infected players. Infected should be given incentive to keep moving as well, so that they can overrun the holdouts. An overabundance of things like tactical jumps can work against the infected, since they restrict their strafe ability. Also, since infected do not have a ranged attack, it is important to avoid things like dead spaces or large sight lines on the map that may lead to stalemates between survivors and infected, which in turn kind of slows down round progression. It's important to be sure to incorporate enough verticality and structural cover also, so that infected have a way out of a situation without getting cornered or having to back off. So a common trend among infection forgers is to actually incorporate infected only routes, and this is a great way to give infected more options and cover while they traverse the map. Forgers can easily give the infected the vertical advantage they need using this tactic. Something else that largely determines the amount of movement incentive is weapon placement, holdout placement, and initial spawn placement. What's especially important is how these three things function together to really define how much incentive there is for a player to move around the map. It's a general rule of thumb to place weapons outside of holdouts so that survivors must earn the weapon by placing themselves at risk. Although it is a good rule of thumb to go by, it can go a bit further than that. A great way to provide incentive for survivors to move around the map before setting up in a holdout is to force player travel times on survivors during the beginning phases of the round. For example, survivors initially spawn near a holdout, but have to travel across the map to get the weapon that complements that holdout. So players are forced to travel for an X amount of time before earning the reward. This should also give the map more of a learning curve for players and add to its overall replay value. Designing these risky objectives for players to achieve provides more variety in interactions with infected as the round progresses. Regarding layouts for infection maps, A lot of balanced infection maps use a somewhat circular flow to cycle players through different holdouts while having a restricted or risky area towards the center of the map. These layouts work well because they direct flow around the map and through different holdouts instead of directing flow from the center of the map into the corners of the map. The last thing I wanted to cover regarding movement in infection is restricting players' movement. Now, in most cases, this is a bad thing to do, unless it plays a specific role in the map's design. More often than not, movement restrictions provide an unfair advantage for survivors to abuse. Let's use the sword-based lift as an example. This was everyone's favorite holdout because it was, well, completely abusable, to say the least. It was basically a one-entrance holdout at the end of a long hallway that restricted the infected's ability to move while approaching the holdout. For this reason, it created some very slow and boring rounds for infected players. Not to mention, it completely ruined the replay value of the whole map just by having that one abusable area. To avoid areas like this in your map, make sure players' movement mechanics are not being restricted, such as low ceilings restricting a player's jump height, or linear hallways restricting a player's ability to strafe. That's all I have for this episode. Next time we'll be talking a bit about designing for teamwork in infection. Until then, this has been Paints with the FORGEHUB YouTube channel, and I'll talk to you guys next time.